everyone, and welcome to the next episode of On Screen. I'm your host, Dylan Wright, and I'm here to take you on a journey through film and television. So Franchise February rolls on with Indiana Jones, everybody's favorite archaeologist, adventurer who goes and takes relics that belong in museums and captures them and fights bad guys and is just a regular throwback to the serials of old. So the Indiana Jones franchise, it was basically the brainchild of two individuals who you may or may not know, Steven Spielberg and George Lucas. George Lucas wanted to kind of make a throwback to some of the other serials that he had watched as a kid growing up, like he did with Star Wars, but instead of having the space opera serials like Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers and all that, he wanted to do a throwback to some of the more down-to-earth adventure kind of stories where they're going through the jungles and finding ancient relics and fighting off the natives in a not so subtly racist way. But he wanted to make a throwback to his childhood in a way that Star Wars did, but in a more down-to-earth way. So he teamed up with Steven Spielberg and created the character Indiana Jones. Now, the name Indiana was actually the name of George Lucas's dog, who also inspired Chewbacca from Star Wars. Steven Spielberg loved the idea. He thought that it was like James Bond without the gadgets, and signed on to direct while George Lucas helped write the screenplay. So the very first Indiana Jones movie ended up being called Raiders of the Lost Ark, and they got Harrison Ford to play the titular role of Indiana Jones, even though they originally wanted Tom Selleck, but he got tapped to play Magnum P.I., and they decided to go with Harrison Ford, even though Lucas was a little reluctant since he was so famous from Han Solo, and he didn't want to keep using Ford in all of his movies. But he worked out so well in the role that it became one of his signature roles along with Han Solo. So Raiders of the Lost Ark is a really fun adventure where Indiana Jones has to hunt down the Ark of the Covenant and try and beat the Nazis to it because it holds untold power. If it falls in the wrong hands, it would be disastrous. And he's helped out by probably the best female role within Indiana Jones' universe, Marion Ravenwood. She's played by Karen Allen and is just amazing in the role. She is as much a fighter as Indiana Jones is, and as we're introduced to her, we see her drinking another guy under a table at a bar she owns. And he kind of asks her to help him out with the journey because her father was a big archaeologist kind of deal and knows about the Ark of the Covenant. So she tags along with them, along with Indiana Jones's helper Sala, played by John Rhys-Davies, who is also another nice addition to the franchise. And he comes back, as does Marion, in other sequels. But Raiders of the Lost Ark is often considered one of the best of the franchise, and I'm definitely inclined to agree. I think there's one more that's slightly better than it, but it's definitely a great start to the franchise. The character of Indiana Jones is so interesting because he's, by day, this mild-mannered archaeology professor teaching at this local university where the girls are kind of swooning over him because he's Harrison Ford. And then by night, he's this almost grave robber, adventurer who goes around with a whip and a fedora and a leather jacket trying to procure these ancient items for either the school or a local museum, or trying to keep them out of the hands of rival archaeologists like Renee Belloc, who's in the first movie. And it's an interesting kind of duality within the films that Ford plays pretty well. It's the same character, and you just see it just a little more unchained when he's in his adventuring role as he is in his tweed jacket archaeology professor role. The second movie is actually a prequel, Temple of Doom, and it has definitely the most annoying character within the Indiana Jones franchise, that of Willie Scott. Now, the two characters that are introduced as Indiana's sidekicks in the Temple of Doom, Willie Scott and Short Round, are also named after dogs. Willie Scott is named after Steven Spielberg's dog, and Short Round is named after Willard Huyck's dog. So it's really interesting that most of the main characters are named after dogs. So if you're a dog lover, Indiana Jones might be right for you. But the reason why Willie Scott is one of the most annoying characters within the Indiana Jones franchise is because she is constantly screaming, and not in a productive way where it would be helpful advice. She's always yelling about situations that are plain to see for everybody in front of them, and yet she still finds the need to scream her lungs out and scream everybody's ears out. Short Round is a bit racist, I would say. Definitely kind of not a great character of Asian representation, but he does do a lot in the plot. He helps out Indiana Jones in this adventure where they're trying to find these really powerful like crystal idols that this one town needs to flourish and thrive, and they run into this cult that rips people's hearts out, and there's a lot of negative native stereotypes within the movie. And I would definitely say it's probably the second weakest in the franchise because of this, and because it doesn't really like add anything new to the thing. It's just another adventure, and there's not too much thrills. I mean, there are, the minecart scene is really cool, and the opening sequence in the kind of Vegas-like restaurant was pretty cool, but the movie is just a little dark. It's actually one of the first movies that received a PG-13 rating. It was part of the reason why they came up with this rating system, where there was never a thing between PG and R, and they thought, okay, this needs to be PG-13. Temple of Doom is followed up by the best, in my opinion, Indiana Jones movie, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. The main reason why it's the best movie is Sean Connery. Sean Connery comes into the film to play Indiana's father, Henry Jones Sr., and this is where we kind of find out that Indiana got his name from their dog's name. And he's actually Henry Jones Jr., and his father always calls him Junior throughout the whole movie, and he hates it. And their just back and forth is probably some of the best dialogue in the franchise. They have such good father-son chemistry. You would actually believe that Sean Connery raised Harrison Ford in a way that was, distant and troubled, and that they don't get along whatsoever. And they have to kind of team up to go up against the Nazis again. And they're actually trying to find the Holy Grail, which was what Indiana's father has been trying to do his entire life. And they finally have kind of a set path that set before them to find it. And I just love Last Crusade. It's so much fun. There's a lot of really exciting action sequences. Like I said, the dialogue between Indiana and his father is just so good. And for two actors that sometimes phone in their roles, Harrison Ford and Sean Connery, they definitely give it their all in this movie. Sean Connery actually turned down a Star Trek movie to be in this film, and it's a good thing he did, because it's probably one of the worst Star Trek films in Star Trek history, but, sometimes that happens. So, yeah, the franchise ended after Last Crusade, and we don't have to talk about a fourth movie that might have Shia LaBeouf or Cate Blanchett or giant ants or escaping a nuclear explosion in a refrigerator. We don't have to talk about that. I might have to write about it in an article and kind of hate myself as I'm doing it, but I don't have to talk about it in this podcast. So the three films of the Indiana Jones franchise are good. There are some missteps, just like any other franchise. Sometimes some things are hit or miss. But on the whole, it's a really fun action franchise that sometimes has some heart, sometimes is pretty dark and depressing, but it's a lot of fun, and that's probably the operative word for this franchise. So definitely check out Indiana Jones, any of them, except for a fourth one that definitely doesn't exist when you have the free time. So now it's time for my Netflix pick of the week. And this week I'm just going to recommend a TV show that I recently watched that was just added onto Netflix, and that's the Santa Clarita Diet. It stars Drew Barrymore and Timothy Olyphant as these suburban parents that one day Drew Barrymore gets turned into a zombie. And they kind of have to deal with her taste for human flesh and how they're going to hide that from the neighbors. And it's actually a really funny, really smart show that throws a jab at the suburban family life, and also adds a pretty cool new chapter in the zombie franchise that's a little different than what we're normally used to. We usually see, Walking Dead or Night of the Living Dead kind of stuff, but it's always fun to see a nice zombie comedy because there's a lot of material to work with within that, and they really do a great job. Timothy Olyphant is so manic and neurotic as a father, and it's such a different role for him that it's really great to see his acting chops. And Drew Barrymore, of course, is Drew Barrymore, so she's going to be good. So definitely check out Santa Clarita Diet on Netflix. Well, that's going to be it for this week's episode of On Screen. If you guys have any suggestions for any future episodes, please let me know. I would love to cover anything that you want me to. And next week, I might have a special guest in the episode, so stay tuned for that. But until next time, take care.